recording now. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Isabelle Knight. I am the middle grade fantasy author of the Enchantria series. And today I am back here again with another author interview. And the wonderful author I will be interviewing today is Matt Myklusch. And he is the author of, I think quite a few middle grade adventure novels now, right?
Yeah, it's now up to 9 books and graphic novels, starting with The Accidental Hero, which is my the first book in my Jack Blank series, and now a graphic novel series, which is spinning off from that world. We actually have this book. I'll hold it so you can see the imagination. It's hard to get the blurring my background, so you can't really see it.
Yeah.
But I'll sort that out in a but that's a spin-off from the Jack Blank books, which I know we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun to work on that graphic novel.
Yeah, it's really cool that you have this graphic novel. I actually did not know that.
Oh, well, I'm glad we're talking.
Yeah. So hello. I hope you're doing well, and I am just super glad to, have you here for this interview.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's always great to talk to readers and writers like yourself, young writers. Super impressive. So looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah. So, to start us off, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your books, and how the idea for the Accidental Hero came about?
Sure. So, like I said, my name is Matt Myklusch, and I am the author of 9 books and graphic novels for middle grade readers. And I have the Jack Blank series, which is The Accidental Hero is the first book in that series. And that book has been described as a little like Harry Potter, but with superheroes instead of magic. I have another series called Order of the Majestic, which is my own take on the magic school, which is with stage magicians like Harry Houdini and people who are doing magic in these big grand theaters and hiding magic in plain sight. And then I have another series called Seaborn, which is about a boy raised by pirates who might be the prince of an island where gold grows on trees. And that book is a lot of fun. That series is a lot of fun because it's a mashup of Pirates of the Caribbean style old timey pirate adventures with modern day X Game style water sports like kiteboarding and base jumping and skating and surfing and all these things that pirates couldn't do or didn't do, but I thought they should do. And then I also have the graphic novel series that I just mentioned, which is Imagination, which is a spin off of those Jack Blank books. But the a fun fact is when I was your age, I didn't want to be a writer at all. I actually wanted to be a comic book artist. And I thought you could get a job creating superhero and supervillain ideas and then selling those character ideas to Marvel Comics. And then I found out that job didn't exist. The job was actually writer. You had to write stories with these characters. You couldn't just draw a character in a cool costume and say, this is their superpower and this is their code name. Can I have my money, please? Found out the answer to that question was no, you may not. You have to actually write a story with these characters. So that was kind of how it started for me. I kept creating more and more superheroes, supervillains, and I realized that the artwork was really just the first step in my whole creative process. And over time, I created so many heroes and villains that I needed to find a place, a world that they could populate, and a place where they could all live and have these adventures. And that became the imagination, which is my own superhero universe. And then that is the setting for the Jack Blank story. So it really all started with me creating superheroes and supervillains, uh, and eventually they all populated the world of that novel.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. That's definitely an amazing way to start writing. Um, yeah, I think it's really interesting, how you started out, creating all of these characters. I feel like a lot of writers do that. And I would say you're definitely not the only writer who has wanted to have a job to sell these characters and these ideas because there are some writers in my writing community who have actually also asked that, which is
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, it would be nice.
yeah.
It would be nice if we could just do it that way. But it's a lot more work to write the whole story with everybody. But at the end, I think a little more rewarding too to have that fully fleshed out story with those characters.
Yeah, I mean, like just being able to see your own work and this world, these characters, this plot come to life is just really an amazing part about being a writer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, what do you think was the hardest part about writing The Accidental Hero?
You know, it's funny when I was writing the Accidental Hero, I wanted to showcase that superhero world with all these heroes and villains, and of course, you're going to have your main character, your main hero is going to have to take on the biggest and baddest of these villains. And I had no idea who that should be. You know, I had all these superheroes and supervillains who were going to populate the world as background characters, essentially, and other supporting characters. And I knew who my hero was and what his power was going to be. But I really didn't have that big final boss villain like a Thanos or Darth Vader level character, or even the what the villain was all about or what they wanted. And I was really racking my brain to try and figure out somebody who would be worthy of that main bad guy. And it's funny, I had this other idea for a story that I was going to write one day, which was going to be this sci-fi adventure, and the villains in that story were called the Rustov, which were these cybernetic parasites who these alien creatures that went from world to world, and they could only live by sucking the life energy out of living organisms, and they would latch on to host bodies and turn them into these robot zombies. Over time, if you were infected with a Rustov parasite, over time your body became more and more mechanical until you became this mummified husk of a person with these scrap metal rusty features. And they were a pretty cool bad guy, and I really liked them for that sci-fi story that I was going to write, but I knew nothing else about that story, right? I didn't know what that story's plot was going to be. I didn't really have a very interesting hero or take on what the hero's character was going to be, or even really know that world very well. So, but on the other hand, I had this imagination story and the Jack Blank story where I had those elements really well crafted in my mind. So I realized that what I should do was take the bad guys from this unnamed sci-fi story that I was maybe going to write one day, and then pull them into the imagination because they actually were perfect as villains for the imagination because they were the opposite of the very concept of imagination. They create nothing; they just take, and they can only live off of other people's energy and work. So it's from a thematic standpoint. I realized, oh, these guys are perfect to be the bad guys, and that finally worked out. And once I had that piece, then I felt like I really had something.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And, just, like if you feel like you're missing some part of your story, and yet you have this other idea that, like, would be perfect for the story, I feel like that's a really great way to just, figure out the story and make it all really come together.
Yeah, I have a philosophy where I just say, use the good china. People talk about, you get give your fancy dinner plates that you only take out on holidays, whether it's Christmas or Thanksgiving or or whatever you may be celebrating for special occasions. And that's when people take out their fancy silverware and their fancy plates, and the rest of the year it's just sitting in a cupboard going unused. And so I think about you know if these things are special, we should be using them more often and getting enjoyment out of them. And I try to apply that mindset to my writing, where if I feel like I have a good idea that may be useful in some other story, I don't have to save it for that story. Can I find a way to work it into this story? And sometimes it actually is the perfect fit.
Yeah, I really like that because I feel like a lot of writers, they have these amazing ideas and they decide that, like, oh, these ideas are like too amazing. I should save them. And to be honest,
Yeah,
I am one of those writers. I'm not like that all the time because sometimes I just have this amazing idea and it just has to go in. but I definitely do like feel like that a lot of the times. So I think what you said was definitely really interesting. Like I feel like that would help a lot of writers.
Yeah, you don't have to save an idea until you're ready. Sometimes we're never ready. We just find out that we're ready when we start doing it.
Yeah. And so, you've talked about like one of the hardest parts about writing the accidental hero. So like what was the best part?
Well, the best part about writing the accidental hero, I think, was bringing that superhero world to life. Because you have to understand, when I was a kid, I was a huge comic book fan. I still am. I still buy comics and read them all the time. But I really loved that superhero world where it was populated by thousands of heroes and villains. It was perfectly normal to see superheroes and supervillains fighting each other in the middle of the street on a random Tuesday afternoon. And when I was a kid, the only place you would see that was in the comic books, because the superhero movies that existed at the time were films like the 1989 Batman from Tim Burton with Michael Keaton as Batman and Jack Nicholson as the Joker, or later the Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire, where you have a superhero in the film and they are the only hero in the world. And a lot of the movie is the normal people of that city or coming to grips with the fact that there is a superhero running around the town, and there is a supervillain, but it's usually only the one villain. Spider-Man's fighting Green Goblin, and that's the only supervillain out there. Batman's fighting the Joker, and that's the only supervillain out there. But it wasn't like that in the comic books. In the comic books, it's like I said, there's a million heroes and villains all running around New York City. So I wanted to show that world with all its wonderful action and imagination and possibility. So in the story, I get to do that where Jack Blank is a normal kid living in New Jersey, where I live, and he gets to go to this comic book world to learn how to be a superhero. Uh, and of course, when he shows up, everyone's afraid he's going to grow up to be a supervillain who helps take over the world. So the adventure for him is dealing with that and hopefully realizing that what he's going to be is up to him, and it's more about what he thinks and less about what other people say. But to do that all within the context of this amazing world with all these different heroes and villains, many of which I created when I was not that much older than you. A lot of the characters in the imagination and the Accidental Hero are some of those characters I made up when I was a kid, thinking that I could sell these character ideas to Marvel Comics or DC Comics. I actually got them into this story. So to get to bring that world to life and to populate with those same characters that I made up when I was a kid is really a dream come true, and it really came full circle to young Matt Myklusch just sitting at the drawing table, making up his own superheroes and supervillains.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the best parts about writing. Just getting to create, I don't know, basically anything you really want. And I'm only just realizing now that like what you said, like your book, and it has like, there's not just this one superhero and this one supervillain, and there are a whole bunch of them around the city. I do feel like I hadn't realized this at first, but I do think that that might actually be one of the reasons I really love your book so much because, like, it's got all of these different superheroes, these different supervillains all around the city, and it just really makes the world feel more detailed and alive and really like it's its own world.
That's really kind of you to say. Thank you. You know, I think that's one of the things that makes the story special. You start with an idea, but the idea, a lot of people will say, is the easy part. The difficult thing is turning it into a story, and I think it's all those little details that make a story special, and that's the difference that the author can bring, because the way that I might envision that world and the details that I would bring would be different than you might bring, different than somebody else might bring. So it's all those little things that make it feel real, make it feel special, and the execution of bringing that idea to life is the real work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. So like it's really all those little details that really brings a world to life. And it is something that a lot of writers do struggle with sometimes, but I do think that like once they manage to like really weave that into their story, the story is just it really comes to life. And that's what I really love about your book. And the world of your book, it's really adventure filled, action packed, and those little details that bring it to life. And so, what do you think was the hardest part about creating that world? And did you have to do a lot of planning beforehand?
I definitely did a lot of planning and racking my brain to think about this world where Jack was going to visit and learn how to be a superhero. And the tough thing was, as much as I had read a whole lifetime of reading comics, I think prepared me, but it also gave me all so much inspiration to draw upon. It was hard to figure out what exactly should go into this story. And I really couldn't wrap my head around the imagination until I drew it. Uh, I remember thinking about this world of the imagination and what should its relationship be with the real world, the quote unquote real world, and how did this place stay hidden, and what type of superheroes should live there. I was wondering, should I make it be filled only with those classic Batman or Superman style superheroes? Um, People wearing capes and having their underpants on the outside of their pants, and running around on rooftops, or should it look like that golden age of superheroes that we often see in comic books, where everyone in the who are the civilians in the world are dressed in suits and hats, like it's an episode of Mad Men, and it looks kind of old timey, or should it be more modern, like an Avengers movie? Um, and I really was wondering, what should my take on the superhero world be? And then I thought about, what about science fiction and magic and ninjas? Those things are also in the superhero comic book world. There's really no limit to what is in the comic book world. It encompasses all those different genres, from magic to samurai movies and ninjas and you know aliens and robots and all these different things. And I realized that I didn't have to choose. And so once I realized, oh, I could have these different sections of the city for these different types of stories and these different types of heroes and villains, it started to take shape. And then once I drew it, because I still like to draw the characters that are in the books because it helps me visualize them. And the same goes for the locations. Once I drew the city itself, and I kind of could envision how these different neighborhoods of the city integrated with each other, and you have the alien section of the city over here, you have the medieval section of the city over here, the robot section over here, ninja section over here, the futuristic section over here. Then it started to take shape in my world, in my mind, and I could really see the world, and that helped a lot. So even if you're not an artist by trade, or don't think you're very good at drawing, that doesn't matter. I still think it's helpful to sketch these things out just to help you kind of map them out in your brain as a writer.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you said about like you like realizing that like you didn't have to choose, because I feel like a lot of the times those are where like I just really love the books because they're unique and like they take a bunch of different things from well practically everywhere almost. And it's definitely something I have done a lot in my own book series because I think I and a lot of writers do struggle with world building. And so the way I and a lot of my friends do approach world building is that like I guess we steal a lot of stuff from other places, put our own twist on it, and basically just take all of these little details, or, doesn't even have to be the little details. The book I'm working on right now is stealing quite a lot from a certain book that I really love. But
But
yeah,
that's just inspiration,
yeah,
like if you look at my Jack Blank story, and it's it in a lot of ways, the hero's journey of this story is very similar to Harry Potter, which is very similar to Percy Jackson, which is very similar to Luke Skywalker. I mean, all of these stories have a character who uh, has a mystery within it about his past and his family, gets pulled into this conflict between good and evil, finds out some secrets about his own family, and he has some powers that he doesn't understand, but someone's going to train him in these powers. He gets pulled into this big war between good and evil, and he's going to have to learn more about his past and how to control his powers, and will eventually be the deciding factor in this big conflict. I mean, that's Luke Skywalker, Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, Jack Blank. It's all the same. But each one of those stories is drastically different from each other because one is Star Wars with science fiction, one is Greek gods, one is magic, one is superheroes, and like we said, it comes back to those details, those little details that make what I would do in my world very different than what J.K. Rowling or George Lucas or Rick Riordan might do. And it's fine to take inspiration from other things as long as you put your own twist and your own voice and your own style with it. It's always going to be something original.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And so, and as you're saying, I really like about your book is that, the way you manage to weave in all of these like themes and, some moral and, those morals throughout the book and without them being like way like too on the nose. And so, how did you really manage to weave all of that in?
That's a great question. You know, I think, as a writer, my first job is to entertain, right? I have to write a story that's going to be fun to read and exciting and want you to make you want to stay with it to the end. But writing for kids, I definitely felt the responsibility to have a message as well. And and really, for any audience, I think you have to think about what's this story really about? What am I trying to say? And how can I use this fiction to say something true? So, in terms of this story and writing uh, for a young audience, I wanted to say something that I believe and something that I think is very important, very empowering to kids, which is very simple, which is simply believing in yourself is a real big message within the story. But I could tell you that, and it's not very powerful at all or interesting to say that. But if I can show you this kid, our main character, in these impossible situations, these unfair and unjust situations, and have him not back down or give in, well, that's admirable. And if you like the character, you're going to root for them, and you may see yourself as this character. I mean, that's how when I'm reading, the main character, I kind of put myself in the place of that character. Like stand in for me, and I envision myself in these situations. So you get to really empathize with the character and think about how you might react in this situation, or be proud of the way that they're reacting. Then you're internalizing it, and so it's all about that show and don't tell, and make it part of the story, and mix it up so you have those parts where you're getting some of that message across that makes the story mean a little more, but also making sure you're pacing the action where you have those moments, and then you have a nice big fight scene or action moment or mysterious moment, suspenseful moment to keep pushing you through the story and get to that next part. So that's, I think, the spoonful of sugar that helps that medicine go down.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, that is like one of the things I love about books and storytelling is that like they show you all of these truths and messages like about the world, about yourself, about the universe, and at the same time, it's like not like a lecture, but instead it's more like I guess you go on an adventure with these characters and along the way, like as you said, like we're shown all of these like lessons and truths, and honestly I just really love that about storytelling.
Yeah, and they say it makes us more empathetic as people because the
Yeah.
more we read, the more we're getting exposed to these different situations and different worlds. Some of them within our real world, right? Different people
Yeah.
have different experiences from us, and you get to see what the world looks like through their lives, through their eyes, and what their lives are like. And that can be in a fictional world. It can be in a nonfiction or in a fictional book that's set in the real world. And learn a lot from that, from not just someone just giving us a lecture, but actually seeing someone's experience in their story.
Yeah, I definitely love that about storytelling. And, I feel like lots of books, like they just really show us different perspectives, like Kelly Yang's books, Tay Keller's books, and, there's just this whole wide plethora of experiences and adventures within, like, all of these books, and I just really love that. And,
Absolutely.
yeah. And, for those of us who have read The Accidental Hero, well, I'm pretty sure we all know that I feel like the last part definitely has a lot of plot twists. I did not see any of them coming at all in a good way. And I won't spoil anything, but how did you really come up with those plot twists? And, did any of your characters like surprise you with those twists?
Yeah, you know what's interesting with this story, with the Jack Blank big twist, which I won't say either, in this in the Accidental Hero. I actually started with that big twist, where when I didn't know any of the story yet, or I didn't know even that that twist was going to be something that I would use in a book for kids. I had that idea of what this twist was that we can't talk about. But if you're watching, it's a good one, and that's the first thing I ask people when they finish the book. By the way, is did I get you with the twist? And I haven't met anybody who called it yet, so I'm very proud of that. Um, but yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to use that little uh, twist in a a story that was for grown-ups or for or a different type of story. I was thinking at one point it might be part of a sci-fi action movie I was going to write again. But eventually, again, using the good China, I really love the superhero world. I wanted to bring that world to life, and I realized this would be a great thing to add to this story to really give it some punch and some flavor. And I had to write my way to that moment so that it felt well earned and justified. Because when you get to a good twist in a story, you know, what should happen is it should cause you to rewatch everything. If let's say it's a movie you're watching and you get to the big twist at the point that's like 75% of the way through the movie, it causes you to, in the blink of an eye, rewatch everything that just happened in your brain in the span of a second. Wait a minute, is that right? Can they do that? And then you realize that they've been setting it up all along and you just didn't see it. And that's always very satisfying to me as a viewer or a reader. So that's what I'm trying to do, building up to that moment. Is can I lay the groundwork so that when we get to that moment in the story, you rethink everything from a different perspective and you realize, yes, the clues were there all along. I just didn't see them, and that's when it feels really well earned and enjoyable. But so in that one, I started with the idea, but that's not to say that it doesn't happen where characters surprise me. It happens all the time because I think you can start off with an idea or an outline for your story, but there are certain ideas that can only pop when you are elbow deep in the work and really living in that world day to day. And that's happened to me in that same series, in the Jack Blank series. There are a number of moments in book two and book three where I realized there were quicker ways to get to certain plot points because it was almost as if the characters did things that made more sense and would get me there faster. And that's a little bit of the magic in writing when your characters can surprise you and do things that you didn't expect or couldn't have envisioned when you were sitting down before the writing and outlining everything. But once you start living in that world every day for a long enough time, these things just start to click into place.
Yeah, and I just I love reading plot twists, although a lot of the times I just go, "Wait, how did that just happen?" But, they're always just, super fun to read and I feel like my characters have definitely surprised me a lot throughout the process of writing my books. There's a traitor in the Enchantress series, like the Prophecy and Invention of the Traitor. Not gonna say who the traitor is, but I originally had a traitor in mind, and then it turned out that character actually wasn't a traitor, and it was actually this character who I'd never even suspected before. And that was
Cool.
definitely both very cool, very fun, yet also mildly terrifying because, like, what? Yeah,
Yeah, and it changes whatever you thought was your plan at that point
yeah,
going forward now has to change.
yeah, definitely.
I heard you once with Tom Clancy, who was the writer of The Hunt for Red October and a number of other really successful books. And he was talking about how he had once planned to have one of these characters in his story die. And then he said, but then the character did something so interesting that I couldn't kill that character. And when I heard that, I thought, well, this person's out of his mind. The character did something. You did something. You're the writer. That's not how it works. But then, later in life, I started writing myself, and then I realized, no, he's absolutely right. If you really know your characters and know what they would do in a given situation, sometimes when you get to that situation, you realize, oh, this is what the character would do because that's who they are, and it can surprise you, and that can take your story into really interesting places.
Yeah, definitely. And so, what did the first draft of The Accidental Hero look like, and how many drafts did it take to get from that first draft to the final completed version?
Well, I'm so glad you're asking that question because that can allow me to clear up some confusion that may be out there. Because the first draft of The Accidental Hero was actually called Jack Blank and the Imagination. So there, and that is what it was originally published under. So there are copies out there of a book called Jack Blank and the Imagination, and people will often find it and think that they found a new Jack Blank story and then buy it, and then they realize this is the same book as The Accidental Hero. So I always feel bad if that happens. So if anybody did that, I'm sorry. It wasn't my decision to change the title of the book, but I do like the new title. I do like The Accidental Hero as a title, and the cover of The Accidental Hero I really think is fantastic as well. And that was part of the reason for the change. But getting to that point, I'd say it took me about 2 years to write the book, at least 3 to 4 drafts. There were a lot of changes. There's a character in The Accidental Hero named Jason Knight, who I'm not sure, no relation, I'm sure. He's a robot and a fictional character, but he was actually two characters in my original draft. There was Jason Knight, who is what's called an emissary, who's one of the people who brings people to the imagination to learn how to use their superpowers. And there was another character named Stinson, who was this robotic butler. In the imagination, we call the robots are the androids are called mechas, and he was this robotic butler who was kind of Jack's guardian while he was in the imagination. And as I was writing the story, it just became really hard to find things for Jason to do, and for Stinson to do. There wasn't enough action to sustain two characters because I was always trying to find a reason why Jason wasn't there and why Stinson was doing this instead, and vice versa. And then I realized, well, the simplest thing would be to merge these two characters into one person, and that made a lot more sense. And then also, you mentioned Act Two when we were talking earlier with your own book. I had a real problem with Act Two in The Accidental Hero because it was really just a lot of treading water and waiting for the to get to that big twist at the end of Act Two that launches the story in a new direction. Because in the book, the main character Jack, as you know, he has to go through this series of tests to get into this superhero school called the School of Thought. And what I had done in my initial drafts was the story just slowed down completely while we did these tests, and it was very repetitive. We went from this test to the next test to the next, and the same scene was playing out in different locations. And then once that was all done, it was as if we said, okay, now that's settled, we can get back to the story. And I had to find a way to weave the action uh, of, of of Jack's quest in the story, trying to find out about his family and who he, what his real name is, and about his past, and weave that into these tests so that those scenes would not be repetitive and would instead advance the story. So I had to really pull the story apart and think about, what was important and what was going to help me moving things forward, and really have it be driven by the character, which was Jack's desire to learn about his past. He's this orphan who's coming to this world where he's going to find out, more about where he comes from. So obviously, a big question for him was going to be where, who's my family here? How did I end up in New Jersey instead of here? Because he was coming home to the imagination. It was where he was really from. So that was obviously going to be a big motivator for him. And also this looming threat of the Rustov, those cybernetic parasites hanging over the imagination, him trying to uncover some details about this threat that only he knows about. So weaving all those things into the story and having it all happen at once was took a lot of work, but fortunately, I had time to do it, and I took the time, and we got there.
Yeah, like definitely. And I think that that's like a really good point because like for like Act 2, like Act 2 is definitely the hardest parts about writing a book for me. And I think one important part about Act 2 is that you need to like, well, most of the time, like your characters, and they need like motivation, I guess, to just keep going on this quest or whatever journeys they're on. And there's also definitely going to be those like conflicts that I guess interfere with their life and their goals. And as you mentioned, there's like the looming threat of Zarustov hanging over them, which I think I thought was a really good addition to the story. I mean, like it definitely brought in a lot of tension, and I just really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you. But I think that's something I struggle with to this day too. Is Act Two, and I think every writer. I don't know anybody who doesn't. Um, but yeah, as long as we make things driven by the character, it's going to be the most interesting and enjoyable for the reader. I think because then it feels real. It's like what would this like we were just saying, what would this character do in this situation? And if you follow the character, you're always going to have a good story.
Yeah, like following the characters. That reminds me of something that I did come across in like a creative writing book. It's called I think Spilling Ink by Ellen Potter and Anne Mazer, and I think, well, I don't remember if it was Ellen or Anne, but one of them mentioned stalking your character. Which, honestly, at first I was like, what? Stalk my character? What's that supposed to mean? But, like, I don't know. I guess that definitely really does help because like you just stalk the character quite literally. You just follow the character around, I guess, see what they would do in all these different situations, and I guess really have their decisions fuel the plot, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And I tell people something similar, which is if you know your character, you know their hopes, their dreams, their fears, what they've been through in the past, whether it's relationship with other characters or just what their childhood was like, or any number of these things, and have them really fleshed out in your mind where you know all those details, and then even if all that stuff doesn't make it onto the page, you know it as the writer, and
Yeah.
that informs what those decisions are going to be because we know what their life is like, we know what they're afraid of, we know what their wants are, and if we know that stuff really well, then you can put them in any situation and you know what they're going to do based on all that.
Yeah, definitely. And so, like, was there anything that really inspired the accidental hero? Like, for example, TV shows, books, people in real life, even, and anything that really gave you ideas for the book?
Yeah, a big thing obviously is comic books, right? Because I'm a
Yeah.
huge comic book fan, and I always wanted to make my own superheroes and supervillains. Going back to when I was a kid, it was never enough for me to just watch a movie or TV show and just take it in passively, or read a comic book and do the same. I always wanted to make my own versions of those things that I loved, whether it was superheroes or Star Wars type adventures, all of that. I always wanted to get in the game. So that was always a big inspiration to me. Um, but also, when I was a teenager in the 90s, there was a moment where all the biggest comic book artists who worked for Marvel Comics left Marvel Comics and formed their own company, which was called Image Comics. So this is Todd McFarlane created Spawn. A man named Jim Lee, who today is the publisher of DC Comics, created a comic called Wildcats. This artist Mark Silvestri did a comic called Cyberforce, and a lot of other artists. And they launched their own company with their own superheroes and their own superhero world. And it really crystallized for me that you could do this. This is something that you can all the good ideas, all the good superhero ideas are not taken. Even though there's so many of them out there, there's always room for more. And I realized, yeah, I can do that too. And I really fleshed out my own superhero world as a result. But it took a while for me to figure out a way into this world and how to showcase this world for the reader. And I think Harry Potter was also a very big inspiration to me, because when that came out, I realized the best way into this world would be through the eyes of a kid going there for the first time. So similar to Harry Potter getting to go into the wizarding world, and he knows nothing, and everybody has to explain this world to him as you go through it. Um, that's very much the same storytelling device that happens to Jack, where he gets to go to the imagination and he knows nothing about it, but Jason explains to him Blue and Stendaval and these other characters he meet tell him more and more about this superhero world. They tell him about the war with the Rustov, and as he learns about the world, you learn about the world, the reader.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of why I do really like these kinds of books where like the character is like getting pulled into this brand new world, because like people have to explain things to the characters. They're also like explaining things to the reader, which honestly works much better than like info dumping a bunch of information. And that's one of the great things I think about writing those kinds of books, because just like the reader, the main character does not know much about this world, and you don't need to like info dump a lot of like information about the world, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you have to parse it out, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always that temptation to do that info dump and just get all the
Yes.
information out and tell the reader, okay, here's the lay of the land, here's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Now let's get this story going. And the trick is doing these little micro dumps where you can, I'll give you what you need for this scene, and then you go to the next one, I'll
Yeah.
give you what you need for this scene, in a way that keeps you wanting to learn more, but you don't get it in this chapter. You've got to keep reading to the next chapter to get more info.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm also curious on what the publishing process was like for this book. How long did it really take, and what do you think was the hardest part?
So I think it took me 2 years to write the book, and then I was very fortunate. When your book is finished, when you're a debut author and you haven't published anything yet, you first have to finish the book completely, and then you write what's called a query letter, and you send it to agents to hopefully represent you. And the query letter is like a pitch letter, and it's in that one page you break down who you are, what your story is, and why you think it would be successful as a novel, and why they should want to represent you. And I did that, and I sent these letters out to all these different agents. And this is back when we would literally send out letters. It wasn't even emails at that point. That's how old I am. I was actually mailing letters to people. And I got this one agent came back to me and he said, "This story seems like to have a lot of promise. Seems really cool, but I think there's some stuff you could do to it, some revisions you can make that could help it help make it easier to sell." So he said, "Would you be open to working with me on a revision?" And I, of course, said, "Absolutely," because this was the first person in the publishing world who was giving me the time of day, right? So I was very excited to have somebody show some interest in my work, and had a phone call with them, and they emailed me some notes on the manuscript, which I then incorporated into another revision. And once I sent that back to them, uh, they liked that. I think A, they liked what I did with the story, but B, they liked that I was open to doing more work and that I didn't just apply the notes that they gave me in a very light fashion, just like on a surface level. I did some real work revising the story, so I think they saw the extent of what I had done on the revision and could see that I was someone who was good to work with and open to collaboration and criticism and not protective of my words. And so they decided to represent me, and we did some more tweaking on the script and got it into a really good place. And then I was really lucky because one of the reasons you get an agent is because they have relationships with editors at different publishing houses. And my agent knew that the editor at Simon and Schuster, who eventually bought the novel, was such a big fan of Batman that she actually had Batman and Batwoman figurines on her wedding cake, right? And her Twitter handle was Batgirl Lisa, I think. So he knew that she was a huge comic book fan, and this was in the comic book world. So he said, "We have to get this book. I have to get this book to Lisa." And she read it in a weekend, and on Monday, I let him know that Simon Schuster was going to make an offer. So I was really lucky that things came together so quickly, because the waiting is, I think, the hardest part. Because you send out these pitch letters and then you have to wait for an agent to come back to you, and then when you get to the point where you are actually pitching publishers, again, you just have to wait, and you can't follow up and ask, say, "Hey, any word on that book yet? Do you want to buy it or not?" You just have to wait and just not say anything. You don't want to pressure anybody. They're going to think maybe this person's difficult to work with. So you just have to spend all this time waiting, which is really tough. And even just writing those pitch letters is hard because you feel like every sentence is an audition. You're worrying about, is this the point when they're going to stop reading? Um, so all of that was difficult, but I think it takes doing the work, and then it takes a little bit of luck to get across the finish line. So I did the work, and then I also was certainly very lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, it was it's really interesting to like hear about like how you got published. And I myself, well, I'm okay, I'm just still deciding whether I want to like continue to independently publish and traditionally publish. And as you said, like the waiting is definitely going to be the hard part. It's definitely a hard part for many writers, and well, yeah.
Yeah, but it's great. I think the the fact that people can independently publish, I think, is a great thing because it allows you to get your story done, and then to have it in a physical fixed form that you can share with people, which I think is really wonderful. And there's a lot of authors whose books may start as something they publish on their own, and then later on they publish traditionally. Or some people have so much success in terms of what they're able to sell on their own that they don't even need to. But I think there's a lot of tools out there that didn't exist when I was starting out that are great for people to take advantage of.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And so, what do you hope readers will take away from your novel?
So I think going back to that message we talked about earlier about wanting to make sure there was some kind of message that was important in this story, in addition to the entertainment, was just to never let that the future is really in your hands, right? If you know what happens in the Jack Blank story, some of the twists that are in there. That's definitely a big message that you come away with, and to really never let anyone put a cap on your potential. From the beginning of the story, everyone is telling Jack what he's going to be. In the
Yeah.
beginning of the story, he takes an aptitude test at his school where they to tell him what his ideal job is going to be, and he's told that he's going to be a toilet brush cleaner, which not a real job, but certainly nothing anyone would aspire to. And then even when he gets to the imagination, everyone's telling him that they think he's going to grow up to be a villain, and but he has his own ideas about what he's going to be and who he's going to be, and I think that's just something that people need to remember when they're thinking about their future, which is that it really is up to them.
Yeah, like I really love that message of your book. And so the last question is, what's your advice for young writers who really want to start writing, get published, and maybe even have their books become like a huge success or something?
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for the third one to be a huge success myself, but uh, but I think it's all in how you look at it, really. I think the first thing I would say is to I'd say there's three key points I would say, and the first one is just to write your story, which is when I say that I mean the one you're going to have the most fun writing, because I used to write a lot of things that I thought were trendy. You know, if there was a big trend in publishing, whether it's vampires or zombies or whatever, oh, let me do that and chase that trend. But the reality is, by the time you are finished with your manuscript, and if you actually got it published, by the time it actually came out, there would probably be a new trend that is hot at that point because these things take a lot of time. So don't worry about chasing some trends. And and I also used to write. I remember writing one story that I thought was going to be a very uh, important story, and that it would be this critically acclaimed drama. I wrote this drama that I thought was going to be this critically acclaimed story where some critic would look at it and say, "What genius wrote this?" and hail me as some kind of important voice. And really, that's not the reason to write something. You know, to impress these faceless, unnamed critics that I don't know and will never meet. The real reason is to just write the story that you got on your heart, that you got to get out of your head, that the idea that won't leave you alone. You go to bed thinking about it, you wake up thinking about it, and just write that story, because the one that you have the biggest connection to and you're going to have the most fun writing, that's the one that's going to do the best. And that's what I did with Jack Blank, by the way. I had written all these other things that I couldn't sell, and I said to myself, if I'm going to take a year of my life to write a story, and there's no guarantee that anything's ever going to happen with it, I better at least have fun in the process doing the work. Because if I don't and nothing comes of it, then it was just a waste of time. But if I write it and nothing comes of it, but I had a blast doing it and I'm proud of it at the end, well, then I've no matter what happens with the story, I win, right?
Yeah.
So that's important. Number one, write the things you're gonna have fun with. Number two, finish, right? Because that's the other mistake I used to make was I would write a story and then I'd get to act two and I'd get stuck, and then a new idea would be like a little, you know, you'd have like the angel and the devil on your shoulder, and the angel saying, "No, keep going, finish this story." This one saying, "What about me? Great new idea over here. Let's start writing me." And I would put down the story I was having trouble with and pick up the new one and start writing that and say, "This is going to be the one that I'll get through." And then I'd get to act two, and what would happen? Same thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So if you keep doing that, you're never going to finish anything. So that is a key thing. Just finish your story, and you can always rewrite it when you get to the end. Sometimes you'll see new ideas and how you could tweak the story, make it better. Sometimes you'll say, "Okay, I'm done with that one. I'm going to do the next one." You're always growing as a writer, but as long as you're finishing your stories, it's going to help you a lot. And then the last thing is what I was talking about with successes and how you define success. I used to think I had to get an agent to be a quote unquote real writer, right? And if I only got an agent, then I would be a real writer. And then when I got an agent, they said, "Well, can I sell a story? Can we actually get something published?" And then I'm a real writer. And then once I got a book published, I thought about, well, what does it mean to be a success? Well, do I have to be Harry Potter or Percy Jackson or reach that level to really be doing this? And over time, I realized that I was always a real writer. If you're writing stories and you're putting things down on paper and getting your ideas out of your head, you're a real writer, and you should be. That's something to be proud of. And the real success and the real win is just getting those stories out of your head in a way that other people can experience them and know them the same way that you do, without you having to explain it. They can all just read it right there in the book. And if you're getting to do that and you're putting your ideas out in a form that other people can enjoy, then that's the real success and that's the real win. So don't move the goalposts on yourself. Take pleasure and take pride in what you're doing, and just keep. And as long as you're having fun with it, just keep doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is fantastic advice for young writers, and definitely something a lot of writers, like including myself, do need to hear at times, like in their writing journey. So,
Yeah, well, you're already well on your way, so congratulations again.
thanks. But yeah, so I guess like those are all of the questions I have for you today. It's been absolutely fantastic to be able to speak with you. I do hope to read some more of your books someday if I ever manage to convince my parents to let me get more books, even though my bookshelf is ready to collapse under the weight of a million books. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this interview.
No, it's my pleasure. It's great speaking with you. And I should tell you, if you haven't read the other books in the Jack Blank series, I know they are on audiobook at least also. So they at least don't won't take up any more room except on your phone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those books, but yeah, keep reading and keep writing. I'm really look forward to uh, seeing your stories out there on the bookshelf as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you guys for watching this interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some wonderful writing advice in there. And yeah, I also definitely hope that you will check out some of Matt's books. They are amazing. I have sadly only read one of them, but I'm sure the rest are absolutely fantastic too. So yeah, thank you so much for doing the interview. And thank you guys for watching, and I guess I'll see you again in the next video. Alright, bye!
All right, thank you.
Yeah.